And thank you for asking me to do this short intro on location-focused decision making. Maybe as a starter, as a reminder, we all know business impacts nature, but business depends on nature as well. This dependency and the impacts on nature create risks and opportunities for businesses as well as societies, and that's actually what you can see in this image. So I want to make it real with an example. Think of a shoe manufacturer. The shoes are made of leather coming from cows, and cows need food and water producing dung. There's dependencies and impacts in this little storyline. Similar for a data center needing water for cooling. And when you then think of actually the challenges where the changing weather patterns we see and the subsequent changing water availability around the world, you can see where the risks for that data center actually are. Even if you add on to that, the data center competing with society for water. So there's potential risks for that data center on the physical level, but also on the reputational level. So we go to the next slide, please. So how do we assess our dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities related to nature? Well, for now, we have been applying the same methods as we're using for climate, but starting to realize that nature actually asks for a much more location-specific approach, as there are locational differences which need to be taken into account. So if we're focusing on those locations, it makes our interface, which is on the next slide, thanks. So focusing on location makes our interface with nature real. It's depending on the location where you have different environments where you intervene with, and also different specific pressures. The pressures you all know, this is pollution, land use change, water use change, and the likes. But there's different environments being impacted. For example, the extraction of a minimum amount of water, where there's sufficient water, doesn't have any impact. But when you're operating in already a water scarce area, that's where you certainly have an impact. So hence the location-specific focus. And if we're actually looking around us, the risks related to nature become clearer every day, partially because we're living the consequences. So look at the impacts of the extreme weather events around us. But even the coffee I just made myself and for many other people. So if we look at the rise of the price of our daily coffee, which is due to the impact of water scarcity and the pests around the world or where the coffee is produced actually. So becoming location specific allows us to understand our interface with nature and translate it into real action, and hence making it really very, very concrete how the state of nature impacts business resilience. But as on this slide, what is location specific? What does it actually mean? Well, it is there where your business touches the ground, where it can be described with coordinates, longitude and latitude. So in this case, it is where the agricultural fields are, where your coffee is being grown, or the roads used to transport your products from A to B, or the water used to cool your data center. So discovering those location touch points of your business, it might be less easy than you initially thought, because there are probably many, many more than you initially thought of. So it really needs a thorough understanding of every step in your business. So how do local insights help a company? And on the next slide, there's an overview of different ways how it can actually help you accurately manage your risks and opportunities. I want to highlight two. So one being resilient supply chains. Local nature insights support you to evaluate your supplier locations, so to avoid those high-risk areas, to reduce resource depletion, and to ensure the long-term input availability. So again, going back to the shifting water availability due to the changing weather patterns, imagine that being combined with growing these water-intense crops. So at certain locations, there will be a potential risk for having too little water. So how can you map where you could grow that crop? And as indicated before, this is already happening for coffee. So the most commonly grown types of coffee are currently affected by the threat of drought and pests, specifically in Central and Northern South America and Africa. Another way to how local insights can help companies is in strategic sustainability alignment. So integrating nature and climate goals, for example, into site selection and expansion plans, or also for restoration efforts, you need the spatial data for smarter planning. An example here, again, being aware of how climate and nature resilience, for example, can enhance one another through nature-based solutions. Very specifically, Imagine this native forest vegetation in the vicinity of a cropland playing this important role actually in promoting animal pollination by providing that habitat in that native forest vegetation for those pollinators, such as, for example, bees. And maybe fun fact in showing the importance of it, only some 75% of all food-related crops depend on insect pollination. So maybe an ask to you, look around you, what nature can you observe from where you are now or from your work location? And share this with us in the chat, just simply to do a practical exercise in learning to identify where does your business and do your operations really touch the ground. And whilst having you type that, let me dare to make this statement that nature is actually in every decision we make. And this can be any of the decisions as listed on this slide. And again, this is referring to the A-Track primer on location-focused decision-making, which Amanda just talked about. But let me highlight two. One on the own operation. So nature risks such as water scarcity, flooding, ecosystem degradation, they are all inherently local and can significantly disrupt your operations. So integrating nature and the site-specific factors into location decisions, into expansion strategies and daily operations helps you safeguard your business continuity. An example, this beverage company who has taken this very proactive approach to selecting locations where they have a minimal environmental impact. And they were looking at locations for its bottling plants. And they done a thorough water risk assessment for each of the regions they were thinking of putting those bottling plants. So first they did was analyzing local water availability now, but also in the future. They wouldn't be the first to transport water in trucks to a location because of the lack of water. The second, what they did is to look at the potential impacts of their operations on the surrounding communities and ecosystems. And that exercise, after that, they choose the site to build the bottling plants. A second example on supply chain. So resource availability, nature's health, but also regulatory risk, they all differ by location. And these factors can also significantly disrupt your supply chains. So by embedding those location-specific insights into sourcing decisions, businesses can actually reduce exposure to supply shocks, cost fluctuations, and reputational damage. And since I'm positive by nature, I don't only like to look at risks, but also at opportunities. So maybe an example of a company which is called Skredding Ecuador. It's part of a Dutch animal nutrition company called Nutreco. And this company produces shrimp feed. And they're replacing two ingredients, fish meal and fish oil, with insects and algae. You can imagine that fish itself will become more restricted or maybe not available as much as it is nowadays. And algae might be. So with this thinking and this change, they will actually help increase the diversity and flexibility of their sourcing strategy. So how to engage with other functions on nature? What I always like to do is place myself in the shoes of my colleagues who I'm collaborating with. And again, also using that mapping of your business where your business touches the ground. Remember the longitude and latitude. So combining that will actually help you imagine which roles do actually I have to engage with because they connect with nature very specifically. And also they expect the unexpected, because I do remember this project with a client where we were working with that client, setting the global biodiversity framework, and then in engaging with the sites and getting to know about the biodiversity on the sites. It were actually the guards of that site who had very good visibility on the nature and the biodiversity and species on the site, because occasionally they were asked to support in the rescue of some of those animals in some way getting stranded at the site. And maybe a last example, again, also site related, and engagement of sites. It's an example of Nutrien, which is on the next slide. So Nutrien, in the process of identifying the dependencies, impact risks, and risks, they included a step where the more general outputs acquired were actually interpreted and validated to understand the relevance for each of the manufacturing sites. And they did so using the knowledge present at the individual sites. And on top of that, they also sought to understand the nature-related actions currently being taken at the site and new opportunities which might be undertaken to mitigate the site risks. And in all of that, they also looked at the benefits for the sites themselves and for the communities around that sites. So many ways to engage with your colleagues on this. So just imagine or remember, think for yourself, what roles do you at present engage with when you're talking on nature? And also here, maybe add in the chat so we can see where everybody is engaging with. And as a first kind of like play with your thoughts, take a look at these two spider webs, which actually shows how different interventions need different collaborations. And that's what we try to depict here. So take an empty web, consider for yourself what decision you want to make and who needs to be engaged. The more the little pie is filled, the more they should be engaged. And you can see how there's differences between the different interventions which you need to take. Thank you very much. Over back to you, Amanda.